Hello, my English 113 students. Welcome to week 12. Yay, week 12. Okay, fantastic. So let's start with a lecture and then we'll get to what we're doing this week. Huh? Yeah, something different this week. Okay, so, and now, Writing Project 3. So Writing Project 2 was an annotated bibliography. Basically, you did research on something, and you created an annotated bibliography, and now you're going to use that research for writing project number 3. Wow. So what was the prompt? Okay, the prompt for writing project 3 and writing project 2 is basically, in what way does the author use narrative devices to develop the identified theme? For this class, we are talking about the book Raisin in the Sun. That's one we bought and we used for this class. So your goal is to do a research paper on the identified theme, of the book Raisin in the Sun, and then what narrative devices were used to develop this identified theme. What do these mean? Well, that's what you did research for, to figure out what they meant. That's kind of the point of this research, for you to research and figure something out. Now, when it comes to writing the paper, I will help you with this. Okay, you need to start off with the thesis statement. Well, what's a thesis statement? Okay, well, a thesis statement is the sentence that states the main idea of a writing assignment and helps control the ideas within the paper. It basically acts as a GPS, as a sort of thing. Kind of shows you, explains kind of what the paper is about and how we're going to get there to back up what that's about. Yeah. What is it not? Okay, it is not merely a topic. You just wouldn't say, whatever. I'll show you this in this. But a thesis statement is basically it's a sentence that states, again, the main idea, and then it kind of helps control the idea of the paper. So let's see how this looks. Okay, a little bit more about the thesis statement first. It clearly defines what the paper is about. After I get done reading the thesis statement, I should know, oh, this paper is about this. Okay. It gives just enough information to shape how the paper is organized. Okay, you don't have a lot of detail. You don't really even have examples per se too much in the thesis statement. It's just enough information to kind of show how the paper will be organized, kind of like that GPS. Which way are we headed? Okay, and it is general enough to introduce the concepts of the paper without explaining them in detail. Again, a lot of students want to write a whole bunch at the beginning. You're like, no, we just need to introduce what we're talking about first. The thesis statement is really kind of the introduction. It's kind of introducing the concept. So let's take a look at a bad thesis statement. This paper is about the theme of the book Gone with the Wind. Okay, well, it clearly defines what the paper is about. Okay, but this is what the topic is about. Okay, well, that's okay, but how are we getting there? What is the theme? Okay, well, how are we going to prove what the theme is? No, this is not a good example. This is a bad example of a thesis statement. This paper is about the theme of the book. Okay, no, that's not good. Okay, so again, look at this. Does it clearly define what the paper is about? Yes, it does. Okay, does it give just enough information to shape how the paper will be organized? No, it didn't do that at all. I have no idea how the paper is going to be organized or whatever. Okay, is it general enough to introduce the concepts of the paper without explaining them much in detail? It didn't introduce anything. It just said this is about Gone with the Wind. It didn't talk about the theme. It didn't talk about anything. So that would be an example of why that was a bad example. Let's take a look at a good example. An example of a better thesis statement. Gone with the Wind is a novel where the central theme is overcoming adversity with willpower, as demonstrated by Scarlett's experiences and trials in the Civil War, where she must learn to survive in a world of chaos. Okay, so here we are talking again. Well, we know the paper's about Gone with the Wind. Okay, and we know, what the central theme is. We've stated what the central theme is. Overcoming adversity with willpower. Okay, but how is that achieved? Okay, well, it's demonstrated by Scarlett's experiences and her trials, and it deals with the Civil War and the world of chaos. Not a lot of detail here, just enough to kind of overview what this paper is going to be about. See that? That would be a better thesis statement. It has what we're talking about, clearly defines the theme, and kind of gives you the layout of how we're going to explain this. Okay? So how do you explain these experiences? Well, we'll take a look at that in a second. So a basic outline for this research paper is that you would start with your thesis. That would be the first thing you start with. And then you have proof 1, which would be example from the texts with analysis. So if you're saying the theme is overcoming adversity with willpower, then you would give an example in the book where that would be the case. Okay? In this particular chapter, Scarlett does this particular thing. And then you would analyze why that backs up your proof or your thesis statement. Okay? Proof 2. Okay? It's not enough just to bring one thing. Give another example of text to back up why you think it's a theme. And so on and so on. Okay? You can have a lot of proofs. You need more than just one, though. Examples from the text. And I'll show you specifically for writing Project 3 what you're supposed to do for this. Then you have a conclusion. And then the last thing is your works cited. Now, the good news about the works cited page, which we'll talk about in a few weeks, is that you basically already created it sort of when you did the annotated bibliography. Yay! All right. So, now, one thing about proof, okay, about your proof. You want to have good proof. If you just bring weak proof, okay, it's kind of like this guy right here. Is this the guy you want defending your armies and your families? Okay, well, he may be okay with a gun, but I don't know. Would you rather trust him, or maybe would you want to bring in, I don't know, these guys? Okay, this is better proof. We got more of them, and they look more like soldierly. Okay, they're going to be able to defend your thesis statement much better because we got more of them, and they're actually better soldiers, I guess it were. Okay, so again, a note about the thesis. It can change. So let's say you've written your thesis statement of what you think the theme is and the examples, and then you're writing. As you're writing your paper, you may find that you discover that your proof and examples don't quite match the thesis. Like, what do I do? Okay, it's okay to change your thesis statement in the revision process so that it better reflects the paper. In fact, you probably will change the thesis statement. The thesis statement, when you first write it, is just your general idea of where you're going to go. Sometimes when you actually go down the path, you realize, hey, this is not quite the way I said we were going to go. But instead of changing the way you're going to go, you got to go with what the research says and what the paper comes up with. And then you realize after the fact, well, this is the path that we took. So I'm actually going to go back to the thesis and change it to demonstrate the path that we're actually going to take in the paper. You may not know. I mean, when you start with your paper, you're going to write a thesis because you're going to guess where you're going to go. But until you've actually written it, you don't know for sure. Yeah, there's that thing. So, and again, for the works cited, you only need to include the sources that you use in the paper. So for your annotated bibliography, if you had 4 sources and you ended up only using 2 of them, and then you used 2 other ones you discovered along the way, you don't have to include sources that you did not put in the paper. So that's kind of the overall lecture for that. Now, what are we doing this week? So let's take a look. Okay, goals for week 2. Introduce paper 3 and thesis writing. We did that. Okay, your goal is to create a thesis for paper 3. Watch this video. Okay, we're doing that. Your first essay is basically all you're going to do is just write your thesis. For writing Project 3, we're going to break it up over a period of time. So all you're going to really be working on is writing the working thesis. Okay, and I did have the MLA format example here too, so you can see what it should look like. There is a quiz on thesis, okay, which we just covered in this PowerPoint. All the answers in this are found in this PowerPoint to this quiz. There's only 4 questions. Let's take a closer look at writing Project 3. So if I click on this, it brings up writing Project 3. This is the same assignment that's being done by every single English 113 class. And again, the prompt is, in what way does the author use narrative devices to develop the identified theme? Again, for this class, with love, I'm reminding you, we're doing this for Raisin in the Sun. Now, when we go back to our outline here, remember we have thesis, proof 1, proof 2, proof 3, and then the conclusion. These parts right here, this proof 1, okay, examples from the text, how are you going to write that? Well, the good news is it kind of explains it right here in this, again, for the assessment for English 113. Okay, principles of analyzing a passage. So again, if you're saying, hey, the theme for this book, Raisin in the Sun, is, I don't know, I'm not going to give you what a theme would actually be. Let's call it a theme that it wouldn't be. I don't know, underdogs always win. Okay. Well, then let's say you find a passage in the book that backs up the concept that underdogs always win. By the way, that is not the theme of Raisin in the Sun. But then you'll say you find a passage in the book, okay? Once you find the passage, okay, then basically you would kind of answer these questions. Okay, what does that mean? When you analyze that, okay, you would want to then follow this basic thing after these questions. Offer a topic sentence including the basic observation of the passage. Offer the context of the passage. Don't explain. You don't have to explain the whole book, but who's talking or what's going on in the story at this point in time. If when you cite it, if you're going to copy it directly from the book, make sure you use MLA formatting. We'll talk about that more in future lessons. And then you follow up the passage with the combination of some of the elements. Describe how it reveals the narrative device. Consider what is said. Assess how it is said. The word choice. Why do they choose that? Explains what it means. Again, this can be, as it says, your interpretation of the literary work is valid as long as you can support it with quotes and information from the piece. So as you interpreted it, this is kind of your interpretation of this thing that backs up your point, and it's valid as long as it backs it up. Okay. Now, what does it say? So it says incorporate 2 to 4 additional sources. Well, you used 4 sources in your annotated bibliography. I want you to use all 4 of those sources. Why? Because your paper has to be between 3 and 5 pages. That is set by the school. That is not set by me. In order to get to 3 to 5 pages, if you follow this, thesis, proof, conclusion, works cited, that does not count as one of those 3 to 5 pages. This stuff right here, that counts as the 3 to 5 pages. In order for you to get to 3 to 5 pages, you really probably need to use all 4 of your sources, okay, to help you with your paper. Again, if you haven't written a research paper in a while, this may be a little intimidating, but what we're going to do, again, is that for this week, we're just working on the thesis. Next week, okay, you're going to learn about some credibility, and you're going to have a chance to, now that you've kind of gone through and looked at your basic outline of how you put your paper together, did you change your thesis? Now that you're kind of starting to write a little bit about it, the following week you put your rough draft in. We'll talk more about citing sources in week 14. Week 15, you get a chance to work on the revision for the paper. So we just have a little extra credit quiz and a little essay. So you'll have a chance to work on this revision. And then week 16, that's when it's finally due. This isn't due until the 28th of November. Okay, so your full-blown paper, you have a good chunk of time to work on it. Okay. Don't put it off to the last minute. And then week 17, we just have an extra end-of-term survey credit. So basically, Writing Project 3 is really the last big thing we're doing. We have just a few essays, but they're connected directly to writing this paper. And so, this will give you time and effort, time for you to put the effort into creating this project. So take it through in bite-sized chunks. Start with a thesis. And then start, after you've got your thesis, then start looking back through Writing Project 2 of what you researched and figure out how you're going to back up your points, and then we'll take it from there. All right, so you can do this, guys. I know you can. Sometimes it can seem a little intimidating if you haven't done this in a while. Just start putting stuff down on paper, and it'll start going. All right, go do it.